officials at the African Union say that the Continental Peace and Security Council will seriously consider the U.S. recommendations for the AU to take over the Burundian mediation. The AU, however, maintains that the region should still play a leading role in pacifying Burundi. Now, let's get you some analysis on this development and this particular story. We're now joined live here in our Nairobi studios by Professor Macharia Munene. He is, of course, an international relations expert. Professor, thanks as always for your time. Now, let's begin with the fact that the U.S. is arguing that the current efforts led by the East African community to bring peace to Burundi, they're saying these efforts have essentially failed. They're therefore calling on the African Union to take over. Do you think their reading of the situation is accurate?
Well, there is reason to be concerned that the situation in Burundi does not seem to be getting better. And maybe more effort by the East African community leadership needs to be exerted, bearing in mind that the East African community, like other sub-region organizations, operate within the mandate of the African Union. So what the suggestion is that maybe Addis Ababa should come down on Arusha to say do something about this thing. It's a good thought that more pressure needs to come from all sides, not just within the East African community or the African Union. I think it's a concerted effort that needs to be brought to bear so that to be able to straighten up the mess in Burundi.
Well, Professor, let's leave it there for a moment. We will come back to you in just a short while. But first, let's go to this that's coming from our reporter, Gurum Chala. Of course, he's bringing us now the AU perspective on the matter.
Well, the African Union Peace and Security Council needs to make decisions before the continental organization steps in as mediator to calm things down in conflict-torn Burundi. According to officials from the AU, the council has already gave the mandate for the Eastern Africa community, and more particularly for the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni to mediate Burundian stakeholders. However, there was no tangible success so far. But though the AU gave the chance to the region to help mediate, traditionally it will intervene and take over the job itself to bring fast and fruitful results. So the officials here believe what the US is recommending will be taken seriously by the AU, and the Peace and Security Council will possibly give the green light for the Commission to take over talks in Bujumbura. The chairperson, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, also has duties of closely following the situation in the country for any developments to be addressed on time. The African Union gets daily reports from its human rights and military observers now on the ground for it to justify any possible direct intervention to end killings and chaos in Burundi. And so far, the reports indicate things are not so good. Apart from roundtable talks, the AU still has the option of deploying its standby force to Burundi to protect civilians from any threats. Grumtala CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, of course, now let's return to Professor Macharia Munene. Professor, you've just heard there our reporter in Ethiopia, Gurum Chala, saying, of course, that the AU is seriously considering the U.S. proposal. This because there has not been any tangible success from mediation efforts coming from the East Africa community. But what leverage essentially would the AU bring in? What makes it perhaps more likely to succeed if they do take over these negotiation efforts?
Well, it's a moral issue that bringing the whole weight of the African Union, presumably the 54 different countries being represented, and actually putting pressure, particularly on President Nkurunziza, because he appears to have been the problem in the first place. But then bringing up not only pressure on Nkurunziza, but also his opponents, who are also responsible for some of the chaos that is coming up. So the weight of the African Union, all the African countries coming together to tell Burundi that it is not doing the right thing and that it is a disgrace to the African continent if it continues the way it does. That weight in itself might have some bearing. And if the African countries in general point out to Burundi that it is no longer acceptable, that it is essentially a pariah state, then it might have some bearing.
Well, of course, at the forefront of the East African efforts to mediate in this particular situation is President Yoweri Museveni. And now he's come under some harsh criticism, with some saying that he's been too caught up in his own political campaigns to effectively lead the Burundi mediation efforts. At this point, though, do you think that Uganda might fight back in a bid to take over once again these peace efforts from the AU?
Well, it's true that President Museveni is fighting a campaign at home for re-election. I don't think that's a real big issue in this particular scenario. But he does need to put more effort to be seen, to rally his allies, his friends in the neighborhood to make Burundi see sense. So there is a valid criticism that there may have been some laid-back tendency in the last 2 or 3 months. And something needs to be done in order to lessen the tension in Burundi. And Museveni and his allies need to wake up.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor, as always, for your analysis.